Welcome to We Need to Talk, where we try to figure out the meaning of life and how to reduce dissatisfaction. In this episode, we're diving into the unconscious mind, the human psyche, and archetypes. It's crucial to understand the unconscious mind because it is where your instincts rest, what produces your intuition, and what determines why you're fascinated by certain movies and, for example, find other movies completely boring. It's essentially the guiding force of your life. And if you are unaware of it and you let it remain unconscious, then you will always be a slave to your unconscious mind. But if you bring it into consciousness, you can begin to collaborate with it and start to guide it towards the directions that will really help you and use it to your own benefit. So enjoy the episode and don't forget to subscribe. Let's go. Welcome to We Need to Talk. This channel is dedicated to figuring out the meaning of life and how to reduce dissatisfaction. Today in this episode, we are diving into Jungian psychology, more specifically the unconscious mind, the hero archetype, and the shadow archetype. And the reason why these concepts are so important is because it's part of our, let's say, non-physical structure of being, and it needs to be listened to and kept healthy, because it's like your organs. If you ignore your organs, you're going to deteriorate physically, and you have the same kind of need for your non-physical, your psychological well-being. And if you understand these concepts, you can take control of your instincts. You take conscious control instead of being the slave to your unconscious mind, which essentially guides the vast majority of your behavior. My name is Henry, the host of this channel, and we are joined again today with Nick. What's up, Nick?
Yes. Well, thanks for having me once again, mate. Looking forward to this. It's going to be an intense, long discussion, but we'll be good.
Yes. Dude, is your webcam clean?
Clean?
Because it looks a bit murky. I don't know if it's just the room or if it's...
I mean, I can try and clean it.
I don't know if you...
I don't know if I can. Doesn't make sense. I think I can touch the camera. So.
Okay, yeah, no, it's the same. My bad. Okay, let's start by explaining what the unconscious mind is in terms of depth psychology. And a little bit first, before we get into that, should we shortly explain why understanding the unconscious mind and archetypes has brought us so much value?
Yeah, I would start with the unconscious. Yeah, I mean, they're inherently intertwined.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I should start. I think, so a little bit to explain, the unconscious mind is essentially I'd say the guiding force of your being. It entails all of your instincts, and it operates autonomously, whether you like it or not. So understanding what it wants and how to sort of collaborate with it has, I would say, brought me a lot of clarity, but also strength, because it is such a powerful force. And if you learn how to work with it, instead of it sort of bashing on you without you being aware of it, it's like you become psychologically more whole and more sophisticated mentally and just more mature. And I've also been able to apply it to make myself, I think, more attractive. For example, with the shadow archetype, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I instantly have a question, because obviously we make some notes before that podcast, and you said like it fully guides your being autonomously, and I was like, that's quite an extreme statement. So my first question is, to what extent do you think it guides versus it like steers you in directions? Because I mean, autonomously guiding you, that almost says that you don't have free will.
Mm-hmm.
So I was curious if you could nuance the statement a bit.
Yeah, well, I think guiding is not the same as shoving. Like it's not this authoritarian, although it might actually be. when I say guiding, it nudges you in certain directions autonomously, whether you like it or not. I would put it like that. And into to the degree I would say that it anticipates different stages in life, like adolescence, like parenthood, you know, these different stages. And as your body develops and enters these different stages, it has something in store for you. It anticipates you to act out a certain instinct. And if you clash with that instinct, because you have the opportunity to consciously disregard it or actually move against it, to go in, let's say, the opposite direction that it wants you to go, then you that's then you in some sense you do have the free will, but you pay a price for it. That's what I mean with sort of
Mm,
it guides you. And
yeah.
it's kind of an unnegotiable force, I would say. It's yeah, but
Cool.
I'll get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other question I have, which is I think the key element for this first discussion we have, is the difference between the individual unconscious and the collective unconscious. So I don't know exactly when you want to go into that, but I think we need some explanation there.
Yeah, yeah. Let's break it down. So Jung believed the psyche, which is basically your soul or your entire, let's say, non-physical being, is broken down into really three categories. You have consciousness, then you have the personal unconscious, and then you have the collective unconscious. Do you want to explain them?
Yeah, I think you could.
Okay, so consciousness is everything that's going on in your awareness, everything you think you know, or it's also like your identity, your person, your aware, your conscious personality. And then that's everything you're consciously aware of. And then beneath that, you have first the personal unconscious. Now, this entails all the experiences, repressed traits, and let's say unimportant events that you have, let's say, shoved into the unawareness of yourself. You don't want to be conscious of them. So, and it's everything you've experienced in your lifetime. It's really authentic and individual to your experience. That's the personal unconscious. Then we move into the collective unconscious, which is basically a cognitive structure that is present across all cultures. All humans have it, and it contains archetypes. And archetypes are basically behavioral patterns that your unconscious anticipates you to act out. That's what it is, basically. And it's basically, I have some notes here just to spur out some ideas. Yep. It's like, so okay, let's explain how the collective unconscious was created, which is that's sort of the key here. One theory, I mean, it's really a metaphysical question because we don't know whether archetypes were there from the beginning of time or whether they evolved. But Carl Jung, the sort of the creator of the concept of archetypes, or really the person who sort of promoted them, believed archetypes were a consequence of an evolutionary process. So in the beginning of time, humans observed ways of life that were successful and helped them survive, and ways of life that weren't successful. And of course, through the evolutionary filter, those that acted out the successful behaviors survived and prevailed and, you know, thrived, and the others died off. And then these behavioral traits became integrated into the DNA of humans, and over time formed this collective unconscious, which then basically forces, or not forces, it's sort of, yeah, it anticipates autonomously all humans to act out these successful behavioral patterns in order to survive. And it's super awesome because you think, well, wouldn't humans be able to figure out how to survive by themselves? Clearly somehow not, because the genome over time coded the archetypes into the DNA because it somehow thought humans are not capable of just figuring it out in a lifetime. They need some guidance. So this sort of autonomous control panel was built into humans. So, and classic examples would be like the mother archetype, the father archetype. So those are behavioral patterns that increase the success rate of, or like healthy, they entail healthy behavioral patterns for a mother to act out and a father to act out. And actually, the more you deviate from this archetypal behavior, in some sense, the more or the less successful you become at raising a child, for example. Yeah, so it has to do with survival utility. These archetypes entail some kind of they guide you towards something good. Let's put it like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think two notions are to be made. So when you speak about survival, there's obviously different rates of successful survival, where one is really thriving and like perhaps climbing to some sort of hierarchy, whether the other is just merely surviving, just getting day by day. And then the second really important notion to make is that since these archetypes are so fundamental and evolutionary useful, people might think, oh, they derive or they stem from ancient times where daily life was very much different. And I mean, you can see it in your background picture, like daily life is different now. However, I think to notice is that, as you mentioned, the mother and the father archetype, certain themes simply come back in everyone's life, and you can call that like a life cycle or whatever. And I just listed a few, like I think one of the biggest one early on in your life is like becoming independent from parenthood, um, being resourceful. That's like being able to sustain for yourself and ultimately for others in your family. Then the other might be like specializing in a skill to be able to contribute to a community, and building a character for yourself to attract a mating partner. That is what you say, like the father or mother, perhaps. Then consistently putting in effort to overcome daily struggle, which entails like confronting your personal fears and obstacles to overcome and transform. Like the circumstances around these themes have definitely evolved a lot, but the themes are still there. And people should, that's what people really should realize. Like the stories, because most of these archetypical stories from back in the days are very much different, but the essential, the core still applies today. And that is why we are discussing them.
Nice. Yeah, that's important to state the details of the archetypal examples. Like it's important, Carl Jung really stressed the archetype is not the actual example of, let's say, being a mother, or like what's like practically motherhood entails. It's more of the it's like the archetype is the structure of the pattern. It's between examples you have different details, like the detail of this person's motherhood will be different to the other, but the fundamental structure is the same. It's like the symbol is the same, and that's the archetype. Like, and Carl Jung also believed, no, yeah, you said it nicely, the the structures of the behaviors that help your community or help find something valuable in life, something meaningful, and to survive, they're the same. Just the the practical manifestations, of today in this, sort of developed society compared to 1,000 years ago, the details are different, but the structure is the same. That's yeah, that and yeah. So, and the way to think of it, like this, a student of Carl Jung, what's his name, Erich Neumann, put it nicely. He said, the unconscious, you can think of it like this: our physical health is dependent on the health of our organs, and if you disregard them and ignore them, it can kill you, if they're not working. And the same thing goes for our non-physical side, our psychological side or spiritual side. Is the archetypes are the organs, and if you let's say nurture them and listen to them and take care of them, then your health, your psychological health is is good. But if you disregard them and ignore them and don't listen to them, then your psychological health is put into question. So that's a kind of an example of how to process this. And another reason, like evidence for why archetypes exist, is because stories across cultures and across time, which also existed during times in history where certain civilizations, or certain, no, it's not civilizations, but certain sort of tribes had no contact to each other. These tribes created stories that had very similar narratives and symbols and structures. So there's something within the independent human that gave rise to these dreams or these stories. And there's also other evidences. People nowadays have dreams with archetypal narratives, and like there's something within them unconsciously that produces these stories autonomously, basically. Yeah. And what happened is these tribes, these ancient tribes, observed each other and listened to their unconscious mind, and then formulated these stories, which were then integrated into the culture. That's why, for example, we have hero movies, because they portray a hero archetype. And over time, you had this sort of assimilation between the culture that was produced with these stories and the unconscious mind, which sort of were communicating with each other and sort of kept these archetypes alive. It's like that. And myths, for example, are an example of archetypal stories that reveal the true nature of the human mind and the psyche. Yep. So, and like, the thing is, the key takeaway is that, well, because it's an autonomous system, it guides you, but it's still kind of primal in some sense. And if you're not aware of how it's guiding you and what it wants, it can basically take control of you, and you have no clue what you're doing, and you can act in really dangerous, irrational, violent ways, and which can essentially destroy your life. Or you can integrate the unconscious sort of archetypes into your consciousness, and then sort of work with them and sort of take conscious control of them. Yep.
Exactly.
Dude, this episode is going to take so long.
Yes. Yep.
Cool. Is there anything you want to say?
I think there's like a last third option to what you mentioned. Like either it takes control of you or you control it, or the third one is where you project it. I don't know if that's like taking control of you, but you project it onto indeed movies, onto potential addictions with video games, or project it onto others where you lead an unlived life because you admire someone else too much. And this is a bit already going into shadow, which we're not going to do now, but it's also part of the unconscious regulates that. So
Yes. It's the projection is a means by which the unconscious mind tries to slip through the cracks
yeah,
into your consciousness. So it's kind of, the unconscious mind is always trying to breach into your consciousness, and it's trying to communicate with your consciousness. It wants to work with you, basically. And Carl Jung also believed, apparently, that humans are permanently in this dreamlike state, actually, where the unconscious is guiding you, and you don't know where it's coming from. The only thing is the consciousness tries to suppress it and tries to sort of cover up that dream with observing the things it can see and it is aware of. So yes.
that's
Yeah.
a cool statement.
Pardon?
Not thought of that.
Yeah, it's a heavy statement. It's pretty
Mhm.
far-fetched, but yeah. There's something else I wanted to say there about what Jung believed. Yes, and here's just some examples of how the unconscious mind really is present, and why you have an unconscious mind or part of yourself. When we cry, it's very often involuntary. It's sort of like you can't help but cry. And that's because your body, your unconscious mind, knows something that you don't know. Because if you ask yourself, like, why am I crying? You consciously don't know, but you're still crying. There's like a reason why it's happening. So something about you knows something that you consciously don't know. There's this difference. Or for another reason is, I like to, I think I've done it only once before, but ask somebody, what makes you get excited? What makes you get excited? Then they'll might say something, but then ask them again. So what's the fundamental logic behind why you're getting excited? And most people basically cannot explain it. But there's something that's triggering excitement within you, and you're not aware of it. Hence, it's unconscious, but it is guiding you. So there's something there that you're not aware of. And also, where do random thoughts come from? We all have random thoughts. Where do they come from? Or where do dreams come from? I mean, some people believe that it's just like random neurological sort of flickers in your brain whilst it's sleeping, but these dreams are so elaborate and have this sort of clear structure that means something to you that I don't think it's. I think it would be too unsophisticated to say they're random, really. Yep.
And the same goes for interests. I think that is an even more fundamental one because interests, they seriously grip you and they will dictate your life for at least a short time. It might even be a significant amount of time, but you can't choose your interest. Like you can choose what you expose yourself to and you have control over that. But I can't say like, oh, from tomorrow onwards, I'm going to be hella interested in data science. I can't choose that. There's like something guiding me, which just leads me to get interested, excited, or just into certain things.
Yeah. And if people would say that, dude, it's actually so funny because it's a really obvious thing. Like, we don't get to choose our interests or what we're passionate about. It's just there, but where does it come from? You know, just to say, it's random, that's your personality. If you can't explain it, but it's there, then you're like, you need to dig deeper, basically. Cool. So let's jump into the hero archetype.